Welcome back to another episode of Ocean Science After School. My name is Jasmine, and today we're going to be talking about density and salinity. Have you ever gone to the beach and noticed that the water tastes salty? Well, that's because of salinity and all the salt that's in the ocean. Have you also noticed that it's easier to float or carry someone on your back? That's because of density. We are going to start with density. When an object is placed in water that has a higher density than the water, that object will sink. But if you place an object in water that has a lower density than the water, then that object will float to the top. For our first activity today, we are going to compare the density of salt water and cooking oil. Cooking oil is less dense compared to salt water. So the cooking oil should float on top of the salt water. Alright, so for this activity, you're going to need a clear glass with some water. You want to make sure that the water is warm, so I microwaved it for about 30 seconds. You need some salt, a tablespoon, some blue food coloring so we can tell the difference between our salt water and the oil, some vegetable oil. You might want to pour the vegetable oil into a separate cup so that then it's easier to pour into this glass. And then you also need something to stir. I chose a straw. You could use a spoon or anything else to stir it with. So we're going to go ahead and take our salt. I'm going to pour 3 tablespoons of salt. Now you're going to want to stir your salt and water until all of the salt is dissolved. This might take some time, but it's important to make sure all the salt is dissolved. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and take our blue food coloring and add about 2 drops just to give it some blue coloring. That way it's easier for us to tell a difference between oil and the salt water. Okay. Next, we're going to go ahead and pour our vegetable oil into the glass. Now remember that vegetable oil is less dense compared to salt water. So when you pour it in, you'll see that it starts to sit on top of the salt water. When you pour it in, you want to pour it in against the edge of the glass and slowly. Okay, so now you can see the difference between the salt water and the vegetable oil. And this happens because of density. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about salinity. When we measure the amount of salt in water, that's called salinity. Salt helps to make the ocean denser, and that is why it's easier to carry someone on your back while you're in the water. For this activity, we are going to compare fresh water and salt water and see how an egg sinks in fresh water but starts to float when you add salt to the salt water. So for this activity, you're going to need 2 glasses, one with fresh water, or tap water, so no salt in it. Then another glass that is warmed up, so I microwaved it for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to add salt to it to make our salt water. So you're going to need some salt for the salt water. You're going to need something to start with. I chose a straw. You can use a spoon. An egg. Actually, you need 2 eggs. Some food coloring. So I chose red for fresh water and blue for salt water. And a tablespoon, or just a regular spoon to help you pour the salt in. So first we're going to go ahead and make our salt water. So I'm going to go ahead and pour in about 3 tablespoons of salt. So we ran out of salt, so I had to go grab more. But I'm going to go ahead and continue to put 3 tablespoons in. So I have about 1.5 left that I need to put in. Okay, so now I want to mix all of the salt into water until it dissolves. Okay, now I'm going to take the blue food coloring and add about 2 drops. And then I'm going to mix that in. Nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and take our red food coloring and add about 2 drops to our fresh water. For this activity, if food coloring is optional, it just helps you differentiate between the salt water and the fresh water. I'm going to go ahead and take our 2 eggs and we're going to observe how the freshwater egg sinks to the bottom and how the saltwater egg floats. All right, so we're going to gently place it in. You might want to choose a glass. So you might want to pick a glass that has a wider mouth to it. This one wasn't the best one. Now I'm going to go ahead and place our egg into the salt water. So as you can see, the egg in the fresh water has sunk to the bottom, and the egg in our salt water is floating at the top. And this is because of density that we talked about earlier, that the salt in the salt water makes the salt water more dense. And so the egg is less dense than the water, which is why it floats to the top. But in fresh water, where there's no salt, the egg is more dense than the water, and so that makes it sink to the bottom. And that wraps up our lessons on density and salinity. For more episodes, you can check them out at piersparksailing.org/OSAS.